delighted to share my presentation on Cuba to you today. How many of you members are still traveling today? Do you still like to? Oh, great, you're my kind of audience. Because I've made a living as a traveler and a photographer, and for over 35 years, I've been doing documentaries in the most remote places in the world. And I never imagined that I could possibly go to Cuba because it was always this forbidden land. It was so close yet so far. And when Obama became president in 2016, he had a vision of normalizing the relations with Cuba and the United States. And he made it easier for me to travel there, and I was able to go alone. So I went alone. 2016, and I traveled the country in a Chevrolet like this. Going to Cuba is like being in a car museum. And by the way, can we turn off the lights? Is that possible? Yeah. Thank you. And so today I'm going to take you on a magical journey around the country and island of Cuba, which is a lot bigger than you might expect. And we're going to go from the western part of the country to the eastern part. And so having the opportunity to go there in 2016, I jumped on the opportunity, and you can see here how big Cuba is. It's a very big country. It would take you several days to go from Havana in the west all the way to the eastern part in Baracoa and Santiago de Cuba. But I've been to every country, every province, every city, every town in Cuba. I've been going back and forth there for 8 years now. And now I'm leading tours of small groups of Americans around the greater Havana and western part of Cuba for people who might want to experience this very unique culture and this way of life that's filled with music and art and great food and amazing things to see and do. So you're probably, and by the way, I'm passing around a clipboard if anybody wants to leave their email for me. I can send you some information on my tour to Cuba. And I also have some promos here you can take after the show. So you're probably wondering, you've been traveling around the world for 35 years, doing documentaries in different countries. And my original goal was to tell a story of the world. I am a visual explorer. And so I went to Cuba in 2016, and something began to happen to me very quickly. As a matter of fact, as soon as I got off the plane, I was very intrigued and moved by the fact that I really felt like I was going back in time 80 years. And that is one of the things about Cuba that you will experience and feel when you do get there. Is you're immediately going back to the 1950s. This is Havana, the Malecon, the old fort and castle in the background there, and a lot of fishing going on. And the images you're going to see now in the next 5 to 10 minutes will all be of the greater Havana area. And this is the area that we mostly concentrate and focus on my tour. But I immediately got, intrigued by the fact that I've gone back in time. I'm in a communist country, which was a brand new experience for me. I really didn't know what to expect. And I'm traveling alone, traveling free like I usually do. This was my first date in Havana. Very, very classy woman. And she loved her cigars. And I started being very moved and touched by the fact that everybody I was meeting in Cuba was extremely friendly and warm-hearted and loving. Now, I do a lot of research when I travel, so I learned as much as I could about Cuba before I went. And I learned that it's a very poor country. People barely get by on, $25 a month is the annual income. That's what doctors make. That's what attorneys make. That's what teachers make. $25, maybe $50 a month. So imagine surviving on that. It's not easy. But as poor as these people were, I did not see any homeless people. I did not see any people lying in the streets from drugs or alcohol. And everybody has a roof over their head in Cuba. But they're poor, but you wouldn't know by their looks on their faces. They're very resilient and optimistic. They're very hardworking. But don't get me wrong, they realize that the experiment with communism is not working. The economy is failing miserably right now. Matter of fact, Cuba is suffering economic hardship now more than they have ever since the revolution in the 1950s. So they want a lot of Cubans are leaving the country and fleeing the country. And so my goal now, after 8 years of going back and forth, and one of the reasons I'm going back and forth is because I really fell in love with the Cuban people. And when I say the Cuban people, please understand that as a world traveler, I've always known the difference and always told my audiences to please never judge a country by its government. The government is not quite often indicative or representative of who the people really are. And so these people long for the American dream. They want to have small businesses and to be able to support themselves. And so that is another goal with my business, The Unconventional Travelers, is to support financially aspiring entrepreneurs who are trying to start businesses with taxis, casa de particulars, which are places you sleep in at night. This is the Capitol, by the way, which was modeled after Washington, D.C.'s Capitol. But these aspiring entrepreneurs are everywhere throughout Cuba. And they want to start businesses in tourism-related things. And so as a tour leader now, my money goes directly into the hands of the entrepreneurs. It's the business people, the entrepreneurs that are leading the way right now with the Cuban economy rebounding to a certain degree. So tourism is vital to Cuba's livelihood. And I'm happy to say that the rise in entrepreneurship and small businesses has been rising and rising and rising, and it has the government's full blessing. As you can see with my images, Cuba is a photographer's paradise. Wherever I look, wherever I go, I'm always seeing images right in front of me. And another reason why I love going to Cuba is because almost every Cuban I've ever met loves to be photographed. They just love it. They see it as an honor that I would choose them or see something in them. And this, by the way, is a fort ceremony that we go to at night, which is quite colorful in one of the forts overlooking Havana Bay. So there's a lot of history here in Cuba. But the photography is absolutely amazing with the color and the light and the architecture, the landscapes. It's truly going back in time. How many of you are interested in photography? Even with your phone. Phones can be great tools for taking pictures. Good to know. I use my iPhone 13 a lot when I'm in Cuba. Look at this. Cars, the architecture. So as a traveler, a world traveler for 35 years, I was influenced by National Geographic magazine, and my parents and grandparents were world travelers. And so I was born with this traveler's DNA. I was born to be a photographer. When I graduated from college, I was an English literature major at Connecticut College. And so I realized after I graduated that it was going to be tough making a living as a writer. As much as I did like writing, it was more in the realm of poetry. And I still write poetry. But it was always photography that I loved the most. The whole idea of freezing moments in time and capturing these decisive moments that told a story about my world and also the world around me. So early in my 20s, I started embarking on road trips around North America and South America. Then I ended up in Cuba. This is Ernest Hemingway's house, by the way. So if you're interested in Ernest Hemingway, you will have an opportunity to go to his house. This is his boat, Pilar. Cuba and Hemingway have a long relationship. He lived there for about 30 years. These are some of the rooms in Hemingway's house. Left untouched just the way he left them. And yeah, we go to the bar that I used to drink in, Floridita. We go to the hotel where he wrote Old Man in the Sea, and you go to his house. And then this is the fishing village of Cojamar, where he did most of his fishing. All in the greater Havana area. And I was just down there a couple weeks ago, and I met the famous artist, Jose Fuster, who created Fusterland. And this is a whole neighborhood made out of ceramic tiles. It's really something incredible that you have to see to believe it. Whole neighborhood, ceramic tiles. And the dancing, this was Hamel Street, which is African-fused rumba dancing and performances. Quite magical and mesmerizing to see. And every time I go to Havana, I go there and see the dancing. The Revolutionary Museum. So Cuba, as you know, is filled with history and the revolution of the 1950s when Fidel Castro took power, overthrowing Batista as the president, and ruled Cuba with an iron fist for close to 70 years until he passed away 5 or 6 years ago. And now Cuba has another president who's really just a puppet, somebody he was appointed, and things have not changed very much. But the culture, the beaches, the music, Cuba has a lot to offer culturally. And so I decided to keep going back because I go back now. Obviously, I have a business where I'm leading tours, but I've changed direction, and now one of my goals is to do the most in-depth photo documentary ever done on Cuba. So instead of telling a story of the world, I've kind of changed direction, and I decided I'm going to tell the most in-depth photo documentary ever done on Cuba, because the subject matter is endless. You can see there's just so many things to see and experience when you're there. This is Vinales, the cigar-making part of western Cuba, where the world-renowned cigars are made. This is the cigar and tobacco house. And every time I go to Cuba, and I do go there, you know, every other month or so with a tour, you get to go to this part of the country and the island and see how they grow the tobacco, make the cigars. It's quite fascinating, and I've gotten to be good friends with this family, which is usually the tobacco farm that I take my clients to. And I do come back with some cigars. I saw something here about a cigar box you have, is that right? I should have brought a couple of Cuban cigars. Put it in your box. Next time, if you have me back. Anyway, the cigars are world-renowned. But anyway, as I was saying, so I go to Cuba for many different reasons, to continue my ongoing documentary, to be in a place that I feel very comfortable with as far as the people and the relationship I have with the people who live there. I have a lot of friends now, people I consider almost family. And I also go for humanitarian reasons. When I go, I bring a large suitcase, and 2/3 of it are filled with toothbrushes, toothpaste, soap, bandages, pens, anything I know these Cuban people desperately need, because it's really, really hard for them to get such basic items as those. Aspirin, vitamins, you name it. I fill 2/3 of my suitcase with those items, and then the other third is with my own clothing. But Cuba is very easy to go to. I mean, one of the things that people always say to me when I talk to them about Cuba is, oh, I didn't think you could go there, or oh, I thought it was very difficult to go there. Well, actually, it couldn't be easier. It's no harder going there than really almost any other place. I would say the only main difference is that you do need to get a visa in Miami, where you get your connecting flight. And you have to give a reason why you're going to Cuba. And the reason you want to give is support for the Cuban people. Okay, that's the reason. In other words, you're going for cultural reasons, to learn about the culture, to be with the people. You're not going to lie on a beach, like most of the Europeans and the Canadians do, because they don't have this relationship with Cuba. It's not, you know, the same kind of thing. So they can go as tourists, but you can't technically go as a tourist. You're going as an educational and cultural trip. And that's all there is to it. You get your visa at the Miami airport at the kiosk where you're getting your connecting flight. You check off support for the Cuban people. You have your passport, your visa, and you're in Cuba in less than an hour from Miami. These are some of the scenes that you see in western Cuba. I went to some incredible caves there. And just getting out of Havana and being in the more agricultural areas is very enlightening. Slower, quieter, but the same loving, hardworking people everywhere. Now, for those who are interested in architecture, I'm telling you, the architecture in Cuba will just blow you away. It's just amazing. And they do their best to keep up with it, but because of the lack of funds in the government, it's very hard right now. And Vinales is a UNESCO heritage site, which makes it also very special. Well, now we're looking at a festival in Cienfuegos as we make our way east across the island. Cubans are always working on their cars. And this is another form of transportation. A lot of people get around in horse and carriages. And quite often when I'm traveling around in Havana, I take a bici taxi, which is a taxi with a guy bicycles for you. That's an inexpensive way of getting around. Look at the shelves in this pharmacy. Do you see how empty they are? Yeah, that's typical, where most things in Cuba are almost impossible to get right now in the pharmacies. So, you know, when you go to a place and you immerse yourself as much as I do, and you can fall in love with the people who live there, you can't help feeling, you know, something in your heart for them. And this is why Cuba has changed me in many ways. It's enlightened me as a world traveler. I'm open to changing direction now, like I always did on specific journeys, but changing a direction in life for the time being. I will still travel around the world. I don't know how long this documentary will last, but I will always continue to go to Cuba and support the people and help the people and continue my photography there. Dominoes is the national sport. Everywhere you go, you see dominoes. Well, let's talk about photography a little bit. My style is to look for faces that I feel have character, and then I walk up to people, I approach them, I let them know that I'm a photographer, and one thing leads to the next. By the way, this is typical of the lines that you usually have to wait in for most everything in Cuba, whether it's bread or food, or people do get remittances. In other words, they get a monthly allowance to get bread and certain types of rations. That's part of the government plan, is to give people a certain amount of food and coffee, eggs, necessities every month, but it's still not enough to survive on. Most people in Cuba right now are surviving on monies being sent from the United States, from family members or who live in Canada, let's say. They're able to get to the United States or Canada, let's say, and get a job and make really good money, and then they're able to send the money back to the families in Cuba who still very, very poor and have little access to making good income. But anyway, my approach to photographing people is just to let them know that I'm a professional photographer and ask them if their permission to take their picture. Like I said, very, very rarely do they ever say no. And one thing leads to the next, where you get a portrait like this. These portraits that you see are real natural portraits. They're not posed necessarily. I don't ask people to pose. I just let them kind of do their own thing for a few minutes while I watch and talk to them, and then it leads to a successful portrait. And this is a cemetery, a very famous cemetery where the revolutionary Che Guevara was buried. Huge monument in Santa Clara. And this is where we're making our way across the central part of the country now. And it wasn't the cemetery and the monument for Che that really moved me the most. It was walking around the neighborhood near the monument, where I met these people who welcomed me into their home. That's how Cubans are. They would do anything for you to help you, give you the shirt off their back, give you a meal, give you some rum, whatever it takes to, you know, befriend you. And they want to have relationships with us. They love Americans. Everywhere you go, you see American t-shirts. I can't tell you how many Yankees and Red Sox baseball caps I see in Cuba. They long for the American dream. But imagine living in a country where it's not allowed, where you have a dictatorship controlling everything. Now, they are allowing this rise in entrepreneurship, as I was saying before. And they just allowed social media and usage of the internet only, I'm going to say, 6 or 7 years ago, which was a big experiment, because that could have easily backfired with people, you know, lashing out at the government. But normally it is monitored, but most people who speak out on social media are basically just talking about, you know, things like gay rights or animal abuse or things of that sort. But if these people were to say anything that was really anti-government, you know, they could get in big trouble. I don't know how many of you watch the news in regards to Cuba, but you may have heard that there was a protest close to 2 years ago in Havana, where hundreds of people took to the streets and protested against the government. And 200 of those people ended up in prison. And they're still in prison. And this is probably the biggest obstacle and leading reason why the Biden administration will not even consider normalizing our relations more, or certainly ending the embargo, is because of the imprisonment of these political prisoners who are there just for speaking out. And it's very discouraging, it's very sad. This government is very rigid and stubborn, and it doesn't seem willing to change their ways, even though the economy is failing miserably. The people are very unhappy, they're suffering, and a lot of them just want to leave this misery. The fishing could be a little challenging there. This guy was catching these fish in nets. And a lot of people do live off the water and fishing as a livelihood. The beaches, as I mentioned, are very beautiful. This is the town of Trinidad, which is a very historic, beautiful city. It's one of a kind, a perfectly preserved Spanish settlement where the clock stopped ticking in 1850 and have yet to restart. And the town retains a quiet air in its rambling cobbled streets, replete with leather-faced country folk, snorting donkeys, and melodic guitar-wielding troubadours. So Trinidad is one of the most popular places to go in Cuba. And you can do Havana, Vinales, and Trinidad, and Cienfuegos, these 4 major towns, cities you've seen so far, and you can do it in a week. A lot of people do it. It's like a loop. You spend 2 days in Havana, you go to Vinales for a day, and then you go through Cienfuegos and Trinidad in another day or so each. My tour is 5 days, 5 nights, mostly all in the greater Havana area, but then we do a day trip over to Vinales and Saroa. I love Saroa because it has a great waterfall to see, and also the biggest orchid garden in Cuba is in Saroa. And that's only 90 minutes from Havana. And then Vinales, as I mentioned already, and you saw photographs of, is the cigar country, agricultural, and you go on a rum, coffee, and cigar tour. Last time I was there, I also did horseback riding for a week, couple of days, which was a lot of fun. Now we're in the central part of the country, more towards the eastern side in Camagüey. This is very, very agricultural, beautiful city, lots of history. And I do fly in at Camagüey sometimes from Miami when I'm just exploring the eastern part of the country on my own, not with a tour. And it has an odd layout of streets and a byproduct of 2 centuries spent fighting off musket-toting pirates like Henry Morgan, and tumultuous times led the fledgling settlements to develop a peculiar street pattern designed to confuse pillaging invaders and provide cover for its long-suffering residents. As a result, Camagüey's sinuous streets and narrow winding alleys are more reminiscent of a Moroccan Medina. Hidden plazas, rearing Baroque churches, riveting galleries, and congenial restaurants are inspiring. So these are street scenes of Camagüey. Now, not a lot of tourists get to the eastern part of Cuba, because most people go to Cuba for a week or two. They kind of want to see, maybe what they consider the best of Cuba, which is all in the western part in Havana, Vinales, Cienfuegos, and Trinidad. To get to the eastern part of the country, like from Camagüey on, is a lot more time, a lot more challenging, and a lot more remote. And also it's this part of the island, this eastern half of the island, also known as the Orient, that is also subject now to long power outages. This is a big problem. A byproduct of the failing economy is that they can't afford to keep the power on more than 12 hours a day in the eastern part of Cuba. In the western part in Havana, there never seems to be a problem with power outages, but unfortunately the rest of Cuba is suffering quite a bit by having lack of electricity, which makes the day-to-day living more challenging. This is a train station where my Casa de Particular was, and I'd wake up early in the morning, 5:30, and get these street scenes of the light rising in the morning. The best time to shoot is early in the morning or late in the day. Sunrise, sunset lighting always has the most warm, colorful, beautiful light to light up your landscapes. So lighting is probably the most important thing in photography. You want to be in the right place, in the right time, at the right light. But, even with these phones now, the cameras are so remarkable that I want to encourage all you members to keep traveling and keep shooting. Shoot with your phones, because I love my iPhone 13 Pro. I use it for a lot of shooting, especially at night. I can be more discreet, and I don't look like Joe Photographer walking around. It's less likely to tempt somebody from grabbing the camera from me and stealing it. And I can shoot in low lighting situations better than I can with my professional camera. So during the day, I'm shooting with a professional camera, and then at night I'm mostly walking around with my phone. And by the way, I mentioned tempting someone to steal your camera. I truly believe that Cuba might be the safest country in the world, because it's one of the few countries that doesn't allow any of their citizens to have guns or knives. And people really don't even think that way. They don't even think about hurting people, harming people, even under their very challenging circumstances. They've been conditioned just to, I can't really explain it, but they're peaceful, loving people who are very suppressed right now and frustrated. But I walk around all hours of day and night, sometimes coming back, 1 o'clock in the morning, and never look over my shoulder or worry about anything at all about somebody pickpocketing me or trying to take advantage of me. It just doesn't really happen there. It's happened in other countries that I've been to, but not in Cuba. So that is a comforting, reassuring feeling to be able to walk around and always feel completely safe. The places that I've tended to go to over my 35-year career as a photographer are places that are peaceful and safe, in addition to being beautiful. And I'm not interested in going to countries that, have serious crime problems or are affected by war or anything like that whatsoever. This is the famous El Cobre being moved across country from Havana to Santiago de Cuba. El Cobre is the most famous church in Cuba, and we're making our way now to the eastern part. This is Las Tunas, where you see a lot of gauchos and cowboys riding everywhere. I went through Habara, which is a beautiful little fishing village. Great discovery. Not a lot of tourists go there, and had a great time. We have a beautiful beach there. I did some sailing there, and this is some of the scenery that you see. Well, now we're in Santiago de Cuba, which is the second biggest city in Cuba, the capital of the East and the Orient, and I spent quite a bit of time in Santiago de Cuba. This is where the revolution began. It's the city of the revolutionaries. It nestles in the valley of the Sierra Maestra and is pierced by a pouch-shaped bay on the Caribbean Sea. It was founded in 1522 and was the focal point of the Spanish-American War. In 1953, Castro led an attack against the Moncada barracks in the city. The attack repulsed by government troops, but the name 26th of July movement became attached to Castro's cause. In 1956, after his release from prison, he led a small group of supporters back into the Sierra Maestra. Although they isolated the city from the rest of the island, it remained in government hands until Castro's final victory in 1959. During the next 2 decades, the city experienced a rapid growth of population and services, and Santiago de Cuba is the center of an agricultural and mining region with exports that include copper, iron, manganese, sugar, and fruit. Look at this beautiful church at night, right in the center of Santiago de Cuba. I got this picture from a hotel roof that I love going to. The culture is just so vibrant in Cuba. They love dance, they love music, they love art. This is another reason that I'm drawn to Cuba and relate to Cuban, is they have a great love and appreciation and admiration for art. So every day it's filled with music and meeting artists. Every night I'm listening to great live Cuban music. And even though I said, you really aren't supposed to go to beaches as a non-tourist per se, you can certainly go to a beach and never have a problem at all, which I do. Just technically you're not supposed to. I went to a great coffee plantation up in the mountains and outside of Santiago de Cuba. And I was also there at the same time of this July 26th annual celebration, just by accident. I wasn't planning on being there when this historic party took place. But I was there, and so I naturally photographed it as much as I could. This gives you an idea of the people pouring into the streets. The music, the clubs there are just incredible. The food is wonderful. Pork is king. Everybody loves pork in Cuba, though I tend to gravitate more towards the fresh fish, the lobster, and the seafood is just really, really good. So these are scenes in Santiago de Cuba. So we made our way now about 3/4 of the way across the country. And here again, just looking, I just tell stories with my cameras of the day-to-day life that unfolds. The ultimate goal is to tell a story about what a place both feels like and looks like in the realm of National Geographic magazine. That was my great inspiration. El Cobre, the famous church I mentioned to you, the Church of Miracles, where a very important event took place involving a miracle that people come to and pray for miracles themselves. And El Cobre is a very, very spiritual place. Sometimes you will see cruise ships coming in, but American cruises have been banned from Cuba because they got in trouble illegally bringing ships in and weren't supposed to be doing that at the time, and all American cruise ships have been banned from Cuba now. These are some of the villages in eastern Cuba, and now we're making our way to the most eastern part of Cuba, which is Baracoa. Baracoa is a municipality and city of Guantanamo province near the eastern tip. This is the very eastern tip you're looking at. I walked along the Malecon at sunrise, capturing the imagery of the coastline here. And it was visited by Admiral Christopher Columbus in 1492 and then founded in 1511. It is the oldest Spanish settlement in Cuba and was its first capital. Due to its geographic isolation, it is just beginning to be discovered by tourists. But here again, unfortunately, having bad problems with electricity. But those who venture to go to this remote northeastern corner of the island, this is the statue of Columbus, by the way, will discover an almost unspoiled colonial village surrounded by secluded beaches and virgin rainforest. On the horizon looms the most recognizable landmark, a table hill called El Yunque. And Baracoa's cobblestone streets are lined with one-story buildings whose peeling, carnival-colored paint jobs add to the local charm. And so this area has a lot to offer. This could perhaps be just certainly one of my favorite parts of Cuba is Baracoa, because it has beautiful beaches, it has a national park that is incredible. The town itself is not too big, it's not too small. This is a very important artifact that Columbus left for a church that you can see right in the small town of Baracoa. More important artifacts. And so this national park that I went to was quite an adventure because a lot of the road was washed out. A truck had just gone overboard. And this is some of the surrounding area that you'll see as you enter the national park, called Humboldt National Park. It has the world's smallest frogs, as well as hundreds and hundreds of different kinds of bird species. So a lot of birders will go here. Matter of fact, for you birders out there in the audience, you probably heard about the ivory-billed woodpecker that went extinct many years ago. Well, it's still believed to be, that's the world's smallest frog. The ivory-billed woodpecker is still believed to be in Humboldt National Park. A few people have said they've had spottings of it. So I really enjoyed my experience here in the national park, and these are some of the images of some of the people who live inside. So I've traveled around the world for 35 years, and now I'm traveling back and forth to Cuba. I've always been a person who wanted to follow his heart. That's, to me, was all about. After I graduated from college, what am I going to do with my life? It wasn't about making the most money. No, I decided I wanted to be a photographer and perform an important role and create a body of work where people could look back on and see what this part of the world looked like at this given part of time. And I feel truly blessed to have found my two great passions in life, travel and photography.